The Las Vegas Hilton showroom fell silent on September 3, 1972, when Elvis Presley stopped mid-rehearsal and pointed at one of his backup singers. "You," he said, his voice cold. "You're done. Get off my stage." The woman he was pointing at was Kathy Westmoreland, a 23-year-old soprano with a voice so pure and powerful that it had been drawing attention away from Elvis himself. She stood frozen, confused, her microphone still in her hand. "I said get off my stage," Elvis repeated. "You're fired. Pack your things and leave." Kathy's face crumpled. In front of the entire band, the other backup singers, and dozens of crew members, she walked off the stage in tears. Nobody understood what had just happened. Kathy had been with Elvis's show for only 3 months, but she'd quickly become known for her incredible vocal range and her ability to hit notes that seemed impossible. During performances, audience members would sometimes turn to watch her instead of Elvis, mesmerized by the power of her voice. That was the problem. Elvis Presley was 37 years old, struggling with his weight, fighting prescription drug addiction, watching his once legendary voice deteriorate. And here was this young woman, 15 years younger, effortlessly hitting notes he could no longer reach, drawing attention he desperately needed to keep. It felt like a threat, like she was showing him up, exposing his decline every time she opened her mouth. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager, tried to talk to him after the rehearsal. "Elvis, that was harsh. Kathy's been doing a great job. Why fire her?" Elvis was defensive, almost angry. "She's too good. People are watching her instead of me. It's my show, Joe. Mine. I'm not going to stand there and let some backup singer steal my spotlight." But even as Elvis said the words, he knew they were wrong. He knew he was being petty, insecure, unfair. Kathy Westmoreland hadn't done anything wrong except be talented, and firing her for that made Elvis feel small and scared, and everything he'd promised himself, he'd never become. At 11:47 that night, there was a knock on Kathy Westmoreland's hotel room door. She'd been crying for hours, devastated by the public humiliation of being fired in front of everyone. Her career with Elvis had been the biggest opportunity of her life, and it had ended after just 3 months for reasons she didn't understand. She'd already called her husband in Los Angeles, told him what happened, started making plans to return home and figure out what to do next with her career. When she opened the door, Elvis Presley was standing there, alone, looking uncomfortable and exhausted. He wasn't wearing his usual flashy clothes, just simple slacks and a shirt like he'd thrown something on quickly. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. "I need to talk to you." Kathy stepped aside, too shocked to speak. Elvis walked into her room and stood there for a moment, struggling to find words. He looked around the room, noticed the packed suitcase on the bed, the tissues scattered everywhere from her crying. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "What I did today was wrong. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves to be humiliated like that." "Why did you do it?" Kathy asked, her voice still shaky from crying. "What did I do wrong?" Elvis sat down heavily on the edge of her bed. "You didn't do anything wrong. That's the problem. You're too good. When you sing, I hear what I used to sound like, what I used to be able to do. And it scares me because I can't do it anymore. The pills, the years, the damage I've done to myself, it's all catching up. And standing next to someone with a voice like yours makes me feel like a fraud." Kathy was stunned. The most famous entertainer in the world was sitting in her hotel room, admitting he felt threatened by her talent. "You're Elvis Presley," she said. "Nobody could ever replace you or overshadow you." "You don't understand," Elvis said. "When I hear you sing, I remember what music is supposed to be. Pure, effortless, real. I've spent so long being Elvis Presley the product, Elvis Presley the brand, that I forgot about Elvis Presley the musician. And you reminded me. And it hurt. So I lashed out. And I'm sorry." They talked for 2 hours that night. Elvis opened up in a way he rarely did, talking about his fears, his insecurities, the way fame had slowly destroyed his relationship with music. Kathy listened, seeing past the legend to the vulnerable, frightened man underneath, and something shifted between them, something neither of them expected or planned for. Elvis didn't fire Kathy. The next day at rehearsal, he announced to the confused band and crew that there had been a misunderstanding, that Kathy was staying with the show. She took her place with the other backup singers, but now there was a different energy between her and Elvis. He sought her out during breaks, asked her opinions about arrangements, actually listened when she suggested vocal harmonies. He seemed genuinely interested in her perspective as a musician, not just as someone who worked for him. The other backup singers noticed immediately. The band noticed. Joe Esposito definitely noticed and was concerned. Elvis was paying attention to Kathy in a way that went beyond professional respect. He watched her during performances, not with the jealousy and insecurity from before, but with something that looked like admiration, mixed with something more complicated and dangerous. "He's falling for her," one of the sweet inspirations told Joe privately after a rehearsal. "You can see it in his eyes, the way he looks at her, the way he lights up when she walks into a room. This is going to be a problem." Joe was worried for multiple reasons. First, Kathy was 23 and Elvis was 37, a 14-year age gap that would raise eyebrows. Second, Kathy was married to a musician back in Los Angeles, a marriage that was already strained by her touring schedule. Third, Elvis was still married to Priscilla, though everyone close to him knew their relationship was falling apart, and divorce was inevitable. And fourth, romantic relationships within the show always ended badly, disrupting the professional dynamic everyone depended on for their livelihoods. But Elvis didn't care about any of that. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely excited about music again. Kathy's voice, her passion for singing, her technical skill, and her deep knowledge of gospel and soul music, all of it reminded him why he'd fallen in love with performing in the first place. Around her, he tried harder, sang better, pushed himself to be the artist he'd once been, rather than the caricature he'd become. 6 weeks after the firing incident, Elvis asked Kathy to have dinner with him after a show. Just the two of them, away from the band and the crew and the watchful eyes of everyone who worked for him. She knew it was inappropriate on every level. She was married. He was Elvis Presley, her boss, married to one of the most famous and beautiful women in America. But she said yes anyway, because she'd developed feelings for him too, feelings that went beyond his fame or his legend or the fact that he was the most recognized entertainer on the planet. She'd seen the vulnerable man underneath all that, the frightened artist who feared he was losing his gift, and that person touched something deep inside her that had nothing to do with celebrity worship. Their relationship became romantic in December 1972, 3 months after Elvis had fired, and then apologized to her. They tried to keep it secret, but secrets are impossible in the tight-knit world of touring musicians. Everyone knew, the band knew, the crew knew. The other backup singers definitely knew. Kathy separated from her husband, unable to continue her marriage while being in love with someone else. Elvis and Priscilla's divorce was finalized in October 1973, but by then, Elvis and Kathy had been together for nearly a year. The press eventually found out, and the scandal was exactly what everyone had feared. Elvis Presley, 38, dating backup singer half his age, read one headline. Rock star's marriage ends. Affair with young singer confirmed, read another. The coverage was brutal, portraying Elvis as a predator and Kathy as either a homewrecker or a naive young woman being taken advantage of. But the reality was more complicated. Elvis and Kathy genuinely connected over music in a way Elvis hadn't connected with anyone in years. She understood his artistry, shared his passion for gospel and soul, challenged him to be better than he was. And he valued her not just as a beautiful young woman, but as a serious musician whose talent he respected deeply. "When I'm with her, I remember what music is supposed to feel like," Elvis told Charlie Hodge. "Not a business, not an obligation, but something pure. She sings the way I used to sing, before everything got complicated. Being around that, hearing that, it makes me want to be better." The relationship was complicated by Elvis's drug use, his mood swings, his controlling tendencies. Kathy saw the worst of Elvis, the parts he tried to hide from the public. She watched him struggle with pills, watched his health deteriorate, tried to help him in ways that nobody else could because she understood what he was losing when his voice failed, when his body couldn't do what his mind wanted it to do. Despite all the drama and complications, the musical partnership between Elvis and Kathy produced some of the best performances of Elvis's later career. When they sang together, particularly on gospel numbers, there was a magic that audiences could feel even if they didn't know about the relationship. Her voice elevated his, pushed him to try harder, reminded him of the standards he'd set for himself decades earlier. During the February 1973 Aloha from Hawaii satellite concert, watched by over 1 billion people worldwide, Elvis and Kathy's vocal interplay on several songs was highlighted by critics as proof that Elvis still had artistic vitality. She sang soprano parts that most backup singers couldn't manage, and Elvis rose to meet her, delivering some of his strongest vocals in years. She made him better, James Burton, Elvis's guitarist, said in later interviews. There was something about singing with Kathy that brought out the best in Elvis. He worked harder, cared more, pushed himself in ways he hadn't in years. Yeah, the relationship was complicated and maybe inappropriate, but musically, it was exactly what Elvis needed. The relationship lasted on and off until Elvis's death in 1977. It was never stable or simple. Elvis was too damaged, too controlled by his addictions, too trapped in his own mythology to be a good partner. And Kathy was too young, too optimistic, too willing to believe she could save him from himself. By 1977, Elvis's health had deteriorated to the point where performing was torture. He forgot lyrics, struggled to move, could barely make it through shows. Kathy watched the man she loved destroy himself, watched his voice fail, watched the pills take everything that had made him special. The last conversation they had was 3 days before Elvis died. He called her late at night, his voice slurred from medications. "I'm sorry," he told her, "for everything, for firing you, for dragging you into my mess, for not being able to be what you deserved. You gave me music," Kathy said, crying. "You reminded me why I sing. That's not nothing, Elvis. That matters." "I'm so tired," Elvis said. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." "Then stop," Kathy said. "Cancel the tour, check into rehab, get real help, please." But they both knew he wouldn't. Elvis was trapped in a cycle he couldn't break, surrounded by people who needed him to keep performing, keep making money, keep being Elvis Presley even as it killed him. 3 days later, on August 16, 1977, Elvis was found dead at Graceland. He was 42 years old. Kathy was devastated, grieving not just the man she'd loved, but the artist he'd been, the potential he'd wasted, the music they'd made together. Kathy Westmoreland continued performing after Elvis's death, but she never achieved major solo success. She became known primarily as the backup singer Elvis had an affair with, her considerable talent overshadowed by scandal and association. In interviews over the years, she's been careful about what she says, respectful of Elvis's memory, while honest about the complications of their relationship. "People want to reduce it to something simple," Kathy said in a 1995 interview. "An older man taking advantage of a young woman, a backup singer sleeping her way to better opportunities. But it wasn't like that. We connected over music. He heard something in my voice that reminded him of what he'd lost, and I heard something in his voice that showed me what music could be at its highest level. Everything else, the age difference, the scandal, the complications, that all came after the music. The story of Elvis firing Kathy and then apologizing the same night became legendary among musicians. It exemplified Elvis's complicated relationship with talent, his deep insecurity about his own declining abilities, and his ultimate recognition that great artistry should be celebrated rather than feared. The fact that he went to her hotel room at midnight to apologize showed a humility and self-awareness that existed underneath his ego and insecurity. Their relationship, scandalous as it was, represented Elvis's last genuine connection to music as an art form rather than a commercial product. Kathy challenged him, inspired him, reminded him why he'd started singing in the first place. For brief moments when they sang together, the old Elvis would emerge, the artist who'd revolutionized popular music, before the pills and the weight and the exhaustion pulled him back down. Today, Recordings of Elvis and Kathy performing together are treasured by collectors. You can hear the chemistry, the way their voices intertwine, the way he pushes himself to meet her standard. It's bittersweet, listening to what Elvis was still capable of when properly motivated, knowing how much potential was wasted, how much music died with him on that bathroom floor in 1977. The backup singer Elvis fired, then loved, then lost, carries his legacy in her own way. Not through fame or commercial success, but through the memory of what happened when two musicians connected over their shared love of music, even if everything else about their relationship was complicated and controversial and ultimately tragic. She reminded Elvis Presley what music was supposed to be, and for a brief time he remembered, and that, more than anything else, was the real gift they gave each other.